Hey everyone, Jackson here. Welcome back to the channel. What if I told you that one of the most exotic tasting fruits you could ever grow in your backyard is not from some faraway tropical island, not from South America, not from Southeast Asia, but from right here in North America? What if I told you that this fruit tastes like nature blended together a banana, a mango, a pineapple, and vanilla custard, then wrapped it all up inside one of the strangest, most mysterious fruits you've probably never seen at your grocery store? And what if I told you that the tree producing this incredible fruit is one of the easiest fruit trees you can grow in much of America, almost completely ignored by the modern gardening world, yet loved by the people who actually know it? That tree is the pawpaw. And once you discover it, I'm telling you right now, you may never look at fruit trees the same way again. Because this is not just some novelty plant. This is not some gimmick fruit for collectors. This is a real, productive, cold-hardy Native American fruit tree with a flavor so unique, so tropical, and so unforgettable that the first time people taste it, they usually have the exact same reaction. Why have I never heard of this before? That is exactly what makes this tree so fascinating. It is one of the biggest edible fruits native to North America. It has a deep connection to American history. It grows wild in the woods. It survives winters that would destroy truly tropical fruit trees. It has a rich, creamy texture unlike almost anything sold commercially. And yet, despite all of that, most people will go their entire lives without ever seeing one in person. That is wild. Today, we're going to talk about why the pawpaw may be the most underrated fruit tree in America, why it disappeared from mainstream culture, why gardeners are starting to rediscover it, and why this forgotten native could very easily become your new obsession. So if you love gardening, if you love growing unique food, if you love discovering plants with real history and real character, stick with me all the way through this one. Because by the end of this video, you may be planning where to plant your first pawpaw tree. Let's start with what makes the pawpaw so special. The pawpaw, scientifically known as Asimina triloba, is native to the eastern United States and parts of southern Canada. It naturally grows from the deep south all the way up into colder regions that most people would never associate with tropical flavor. That alone is part of the magic, because pawpaw feels like a contradiction. It belongs to a plant family that is mostly known for tropical and subtropical fruits. Its flavor profile is lush, creamy, fragrant, and exotic. But unlike mangoes, bananas, or cherimoyas, this tree can handle serious winter cold. It drops its leaves in fall, goes dormant, and comes back year after year like it was built for American seasons, because it was. This is one of the biggest reasons the pawpaw is so exciting for home growers. If you've ever dreamed of growing fruits that feel tropical, but you live in a climate where real tropical fruit trees would never survive the winter, the pawpaw gives you a chance to get surprisingly close to that experience without fighting your environment every step of the way. You are not forcing this tree to live where it doesn't belong. You are not babying a fragile exotic through every freeze. You are not spraying non-stop just to keep it alive. This tree comes from here. It knows these seasons, it understands these winters, and that changes everything. Because once a plant is adapted to your region, gardening becomes less about survival and more about success. That is one of the biggest reasons people fall in love with pawpaws. They are unusual enough to feel exciting, but practical enough to actually grow. And in a world where a lot of gardening trends are built around chasing the impossible, that combination is rare. Now let's talk about the fruit itself, because this is where the obsession really starts. Pawpaws are typically green to yellowish fruits, often oblong, sometimes slightly curved, and they grow in clusters. Depending on the variety and growing conditions, they can range from modest-sized fruit all the way up to truly impressive fruits that feel heavy in your hand. When ripe, the flesh inside turns soft and creamy, usually yellow to orange, and filled with large dark seeds. And this is not a crisp fruit. This is not an apple. This is not a pear. This is not something you bite into for crunch. Pawpaw is soft, rich, custard-like, smooth, almost pudding-like when it reaches peak ripeness. That texture alone catches people off guard. Then the flavor hits. Some people describe pawpaw as banana and mango. Others say banana and pineapple. Some taste melon. Some taste vanilla. Some even pick up hints of caramel or floral notes, depending on the variety and ripeness. What makes it so interesting is that it doesn't taste like one familiar fruit. It tastes like a blend of several fruits all happening at once. That is why people remember it. It is not just tasty. It is distinctive. And in today's world, where most fruit in stores has been selected for shipping, shelf life, appearance, and consistency, the pawpaw feels like a completely different category of eating experience. It tastes alive. It tastes local. It tastes like something you were never supposed to find in a supermarket. And in a way, you weren't. Because that is exactly why most people have never had one. The pawpaw did not disappear because it was bad. It disappeared because it was inconvenient. That is a very important difference. Modern commercial agriculture rewards traits that make fruit easy to scale. A fruit needs to handle storage. It needs to travel long distances. It needs to sit on shelves. It needs to look perfect. It needs to survive handling, packaging, trucks, warehouses, and time. Pawpaw is terrible at that game. And that is exactly why it stayed special. A truly ripe pawpaw is delicate. It softens quickly. It bruises easily. Its prime eating window can be short. It does not behave like an apple that can sit for months in storage and still show up crisp and clean. Pawpaw asks something different of us. It asks you to slow down. It asks you to be present. It asks you to grow it yourself. Know your season. Watch the fruit, check the tree, and harvest at the right time. In other words, it asks you to participate. That one truth may explain almost everything about why pawpaw never became a major supermarket fruit. It doesn't fit industrial systems very well. But for home gardeners, that's not a weakness. That's an opportunity. Because when you grow something that is too delicate, too special, or too short-lived for modern commerce, you get access to an experience that money usually cannot buy at scale. And that is one of the most satisfying things in all of gardening. Not just growing food. Growing something rare enough that most people will never taste it at its best. That is what pawpaw offers. There's also something deeply meaningful about the fact that this fruit is native. We live in a time where gardeners are becoming more aware of the importance of working with local ecosystems, planting species that belong, and appreciating what our own landscapes have offered for generations. And the pawpaw fits beautifully into that conversation. This tree is not just productive, it is part of the ecological and cultural story of this continent. Long before modern gardening channels, long before online nurseries, long before fruit collectors started making lists of rare edibles, this tree was already here. It grew in creek bottoms, forest edges, and rich woodland soils. It fed wildlife. It fed people. It existed quietly in the background of American landscapes while culture moved on and forgot it. That alone gives it a certain dignity. The pawpaw doesn't feel like a flashy new trend. It feels like a rediscovery. It feels like something old, valuable, and overlooked finally getting the attention it deserved all along. And honestly, I think that's part of why so many gardeners connect with it emotionally. It's not just another fruit tree. It feels like uncovering a secret, a real one. Not internet hype, not marketing, a genuine piece of natural American heritage that somehow slipped through the cracks. And now more people are waking up to it. There is history here too, and that only adds to the story. Pawpaws have been known and used in North America for a very long time. Indigenous peoples knew them. Early settlers knew them. Historical accounts mention them. They are tied to old American landscapes in a way that imported orchard fruits simply are not. That matters, because when you plant a pawpaw, you are not just planting a fruit tree. You are planting a tree with roots in the story of the land itself. You are bringing back something that belongs here. And in a gardening world that often chases whatever is newest, rarest, or most foreign, there is something refreshing about choosing a plant that is extraordinary precisely because it was here all along. That is a different kind of cool. And it is one of the reasons pawpaw has such a strong identity. It doesn't need to pretend to be exotic. It already is. But it is exotic in a way that feels almost poetic, because it is hiding in plain sight. A tropical tasting fruit in the woods of eastern North America. That sounds made up, and yet it's real. Now let's talk about the tree itself, because this is where the practical side comes in. Pawpaw trees are generally considered suitable for a wide range of growing zones, especially across much of the eastern and central United States. They are deciduous, they handle winter. They do not demand the kind of constant panic that many other fruit trees do. And while no fruit tree is completely effortless, Pawpaws have a reputation for being refreshingly low drama compared to many common orchard species. That is a huge deal. A lot of fruit growing sounds romantic in theory until you actually start dealing with the real-world issues: fungal diseases, insects, endless sprays, pruning complexity, frost damage, weak pollination, sunburn, fruit cracking, and all the other things that can turn "I want to grow fruit" into "why did I do this to myself?" Pawpaw, in many cases, sidesteps a surprising amount of that chaos. That doesn't mean it has no requirements. It does. But it often feels more forgiving, more natural, and less chemically dependent than many mainstream fruit crops. That alone makes it appealing to gardeners who want something productive without turning their backyard into a management crisis. For many people, that is the sweet spot. Unique fruit. Native tree, cold hardy, low fuss, conversation starter. And when it finally fruits, it gives you something you cannot just toss into a shopping cart at a random supermarket. That's powerful. Now, if you're thinking, okay, this sounds amazing, so why isn't everyone already planting them? That's where we get into one of the biggest realities of pawpaw growing: patience. Pawpaws are not usually the tree you plant this spring and harvest next summer. They take time. And in today's world, patience is one of the rarest gardening skills. People want fast results, fast growth, fast gratification, fast fruiting. But some of the best plants make you wait, and pawpaw is one of them. That wait can scare off casual growers. It can make people lose interest. It can make them assume the tree isn't worth it. But the gardeners who stay with it, learn it, observe it, and give it the time it needs are often rewarded with something far more memorable than a quick crop. That waiting becomes part of the story, because the first pawpaw is never just a fruit. It is a payoff. It is proof. It is the moment when years of care turn into something real, edible, and unforgettable. And that emotional payoff matters. A fruit you waited years for will always mean more than one you grabbed out of a grocery bin without a second thought. That is one of the reasons homegrown fruit is so special in the first place. And pawpaw may be one of the strongest examples of that truth. Another important thing to understand is pollination. A lot of gardeners discover pawpaw, plant one tree, and then wonder why fruit production is weak or non-existent. That is because pawpaws often do better with cross-pollination from another genetically different tree. This is a huge point, and if you ignore it, you can waste years. If you really want success, planting more than one named variety is usually the smarter move. Not only does this improve your chances of pollination, it can also give you a better spread of flowering overlap, potentially better fruit set, and more interesting flavor comparisons once the trees mature. And honestly, if you're going to commit several years to growing pawpaw, you might as well set yourself up properly from the beginning. That means thinking beyond "can I fit one tree?" Instead, think in terms of creating a little pawpaw zone, a cluster, a patch, a small stand. Something that reflects how this tree often behaves in nature. Because pawpaws do not always look or act like the classic isolated orchard tree. They can form thickets, they can create presence, they can become a little world of their own in your yard. And there is something beautiful about that. It feels less like managing a crop, and more like establishing a living piece of landscape. Now let's be honest about another reason people fall in love with pawpaw. It makes them feel like they know something other people don't. And in this case, that feeling is deserved. Because when you grow pawpaw successfully, you are growing a fruit almost no one around you has experienced. Friends come over and ask, "What is that?" Neighbors look confused. Family members take one bite and immediately start asking questions. It creates curiosity, and gardening is at its most fun when it sparks wonder. There is nothing wrong with apples and peaches and figs, they are all great. But there is something extra thrilling about growing a fruit that feels almost mythical to everyone else. A fruit that sounds invented until people actually taste it. A fruit so unfamiliar that even gardeners sometimes speak about it with the kind of excitement usually reserved for rare tropical species. That is what pawpaw does. It gives you bragging rights without needing to be high maintenance. And that combination is dangerous in the best way. Because once gardeners realize there is a tree like this hiding in America's own botanical backyard, they start asking a very dangerous question. What else have we forgotten? That is how obsessions begin. And let's talk about obsession for a second, because that word fits pawpaw perfectly. The first stage is curiosity. You hear about it once, maybe twice. You think, interesting. The second stage is research. You start reading, watching, comparing varieties, looking up hardiness, wondering if your yard has room for one, then maybe two, then maybe three. The third stage is commitment. You order the trees, you plant them, you wait, then every spring becomes meaningful, every flower becomes exciting, every bit of growth feels like progress. And once fruit finally arrives, it changes you. Because now you are not just growing pawpaw. Now you are part of the small but passionate group of people who know what it is really like, who know the scent, who know the texture, who know the exact feeling of opening a ripe fruit for the first time and realizing this thing is unlike anything in the produce aisle. That experience creates loyalty, and loyalty creates obsession. Not fake obsession, not trendy obsession, real obsession. The kind built on discovery, patience, taste, and the thrill of growing something extraordinary with your own hands. There's also a bigger lesson hidden inside the pawpaw story. Sometimes the best things are not the most famous. Sometimes the most valuable plants are not the ones dominating store shelves. Sometimes what matters most is not what scales best, ships best, or sells best, but what tastes best fresh, grows best locally, and means the most to the person growing it. That is a lesson modern life makes us forget. We are surrounded by convenience, but convenience often strips away intimacy. We can get almost anything, anytime, from almost anywhere. But in gaining that convenience, we often lose connection. We lose seasonality. We lose anticipation. We lose the experience of knowing exactly where something came from and why it matters. Pawpaw gives a little of that back. It reminds us that some of the greatest eating experiences are still local, temporary, and personal. You cannot industrialize every kind of magic. Some things only stay magical because they remain tied to place, timing, and care. Pawpaw is one of those things, and maybe that is exactly why it deserves more attention, not less. If you decide to grow them, go in with the right mindset. Do not plant pawpaw expecting instant gratification. Plant it as a long-term relationship. Plant it like a future gift to yourself. Plant it knowing you are building toward a moment that will matter more because it did not come easy. Choose quality trees. Choose more than one if you can. Give them a good start. Understand their pollination needs. Learn your climate. Watch their flowering. Pay attention to ripening. And above all, stay patient, because patience in gardening is never wasted. Even when a plant takes longer than expected. Even when a season disappoints you. Even when you feel like nothing is happening. Roots are still being built. Strength is still being built. Future harvests are still being built. Pawpaw is a perfect reminder of that truth. A slow tree is not a useless tree. Sometimes a slow tree is simply preparing something unforgettable. And when the fruit finally comes, I think that is when it all clicks. You hold it in your hand. Maybe it dropped naturally. Maybe it softened at just the right time. Maybe you waited years to get there. You cut it open. You see that rich flesh inside. You smell that strange tropical perfume. You take the first bite, and suddenly the whole thing makes sense. The waiting, the curiosity, the research, the mystery, the hype, the history, all of it. Because in that one bite, you realize this was never just about growing another fruit. It was about discovering something hidden in your own world that somehow felt impossible until it became real. That is why pawpaw sticks with people. It surprises them. It breaks their expectations. And in a culture where we think we have already seen everything, that kind of surprise is rare. So will the pawpaw ever become a true mass-market fruit? Maybe not. And honestly, maybe that is okay. Maybe some things are better off staying close to the people who appreciate them most. Maybe its very limitations are part of what protects its identity. Maybe the reason it feels so special is because it still belongs more to growers than to industry. That doesn't mean it should stay forgotten. It absolutely deserves to be rediscovered. It deserves better awareness, more planting, more appreciation, more respect. But perhaps part of its charm is that it never became ordinary. It never got flattened into another generic supermarket product. It stayed weird. It stayed local. It stayed delicate. It stayed unforgettable. And maybe that is exactly how it should be. So if you live in a region where pawpaw can grow, I'm telling you right now, take a serious look at it. Not because it is trendy, not because it is rare, Not because it gives you something cool to talk about, though it definitely will, but because it offers something genuinely different. A fruit tree with real American roots, a fruit with tropical flavor in a cold hardy package, a tree that feels both wild and valuable. A growing experience built on patience, discovery, and reward. And a fruit so unusual that the first person you share it with will probably remember it for the rest of their life. That is not ordinary, that is special. And in a garden full of ordinary choices, sometimes one special tree changes everything. If you have ever wanted to grow something that feels legendary, if you have ever wanted a fruit tree that tells a story, if you have ever wanted your backyard to produce something almost nobody else around you has tasted, then the pawpaw might be exactly what you have been looking for. America forgot this fruit tree, but gardeners are bringing it back. And once you understand what it is, what it does, what it tastes like, and why it matters, you may become completely obsessed with it too. Alright everyone, Jackson here, and that's the video. If you enjoyed this one, make sure you like, subscribe, and let me know down in the comments. Have you ever seen a pawpaw tree, tasted a pawpaw fruit, or do you want to grow one now? I'd genuinely love to know. And if this is your first time hearing about pawpaw, then welcome to the obsession, because once this tree gets in your head, it tends to stay there. Thank you so much for watching, thank you for spending your time here with me, and I hope this video gave you something exciting, useful, and meaningful to think about for your own garden. Take care, keep growing, and I'll see you in the next one.